Hey everyone, welcome back to Risk Biscuits. I'm Michael, your host. Thanks for joining in once again. Hope you enjoy the show today. As always, please like and subscribe. Your support helps the channel. Today, I'd like to welcome my guest, David Holt. G'day, David. How are you?
Doing good, man. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, look, thanks for coming on. Just so everyone knows, David's having some IT issues, so no camera today, but it is what it is. All right, so before we get started, I'll just put something up on the screen just to cover off on a few bases. Look, just a little disclaimer. Obviously, my chat today with David's really just for entertainment purposes. It's general information. It's not personal advice. We're not really in the business of providing you with financial advice. So all care, no responsibility. If you're looking for financial advice, please go somewhere else. All right, so let's get into it. So David, maybe I don't know you that well, so I might just sort of start with what I guess I think I know about you and your trading and that sort of thing, and we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool. So as I understand it, you're a trader extraordinaire, trading independently, obviously played in the crypto space, but also in sort of TradFi as well from time to time. Um, is that kind of like a very high level kind of fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about trading extraordinaire, but but I mostly operate in crypto. I do still go back from time to time to equity markets, U.S. equities, and then also occasionally commodity futures as well. But for the most part, I've kind of left those markets behind as of I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. So.
Okay. Yeah, cool. So maybe let's kind of start back at the beginning a bit, just sort of like how did you get into trading? What sort of first sparked your interest? That sort of thing.
Yeah, actually, so what first got me into trading or like interested in it as, something that I wanted to figure out how to do was kind of just an offhanded remark my dad made when I asked him what Edward Jones was driving by it. It's for anybody not familiar, Edward Jones is like financial advice firm
Yeah.
here in the US. And yeah. So I was like, "Hey, Dad, what's that?" And he's like, "Oh, those guys think they can predict the stock market, but nobody knows how that stuff works. They don't know anything basically." And I was like, "Well, I'm gonna figure it out." So,
Mhm.
um, yeah, that was kind of just what sparked my interest in like, oh, what's a market? Like, what makes things go up and down? Can I figure it out at all? That was about when I don't know, maybe 12 or 13, and yeah, I started playing around with demo accounts. Opened a live account when I could when I turned 18. And yeah, that was a little over a decade ago now. So here we are.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so you basically sort of started trading like straight out of school, and it's you sort of knew that that was what you wanted to do.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong, I wasn't any good at it for quite some time, but yeah.
Yeah, everyone goes through that kind of learning curve anyway. So if you kind of think back to your trading in the beginning compared to sort of your trading today and sort of, what you know and, what's changed, like how's your trading sort of changed over time?
Um, it's definitely gone through a couple different evolutions. I kind of first got started with like super basic, candlestick TA charting patterns, stuff like that. Um, but mostly I think what I actually made money from was obviously not so much the chart patterns themselves, but it was mostly just momentum in general. Like I said, equities, commodities, like these things tend to trend fairly well, depending on regime, depending on, supply and demand dynamics, depending on what market we're talking about. Um, and so I think that's what actually like resulted in me making and or losing money was being able to identify momentum and, essentially hop on board and tail it. And in that respect, that's still a large part of like what drives my returns these days. I just go about identifying it a little bit differently. For a few years, I did get very into sort of more mechanical automated trading. Most of what I do right now is discretionary. Um, but for a few years, I was like market making quite heavily actually on FTX primarily.
Okay.
And you know, um, dabbled in some other sort of systematic type stuff as well. But that originally just kind of came from curiosity, where I wanted to learn what the quote unquote smart people in the market were doing. So tried to figure it out.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So let's talk for a second about the sort of market making and FTX and that sort of thing. So obviously, FTX had some issues, 12 months or 18 months ago now. I think I've got a kind of a rough idea of what happened, but do you want to just kind of talk about your experience with them?
Yeah, so I was actually one of their very earliest users. Sam had reached out to me and presumably a bunch of other people and was, looking for people to kind of come test the exchange. I was like, okay, sounds good. Exchange Street guy, right? Might as well give it a shot. Um, so I got on board the exchange very early in its sort of life cycle development. And generally I mostly liked it better than the alternatives available at the time. I was able to give some feedback on the exchange itself. And of course, you know, being that that was where I traded, I even recommended it to a bunch of people. Obviously, all of that I regret heavily now. Um, because I mean, I don't know how anybody would not know this at this point, but obviously, Sam ended up essentially stealing everybody's money, including my own.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, a bit of a painful lesson there for me. So
Yeah, absolutely. So I just kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit because obviously yourself and various other people that I know and obviously various other people that sort of shared a similar experience. And I guess it was kind of interesting to me seeing like yourself and others, I guess, bouncing back from that. Obviously, or, I assume that financially, it was sort of a significant loss and that sort of thing. So I just wonder if you can kind of talk about like how you sort of recovered from that financially, but also just on a personal level, like how you sort of got back on the horse and were able to push on, if that makes sense.
yeah, so for me, the loss was very, very significant. Wiped out almost the entirety of my portfolio. Um,
Right.
and as you can imagine, say what?
Oh, I just meant right. Like, wow. Okay. Like pretty much
Oh
everything.
yeah, yeah. So as a trader, obviously your job security is your bankroll, right? So all of a sudden, I wasn't just broke; I also didn't have a job, essentially. Um, so that was understandably not an easy thing to get over. It really, I didn't really do almost anything in markets for most of this year, and I've only kind of really over the last few months kind of been able to keep my head on enough to sort of jump back into it and feel like I'm actually in a healthy place to be able to do so. So the first half of this year was both personally and professionally quite rough for me.
Right.
Um, it was not a fun time. Struggled a lot with some depression earlier in the year. Something that I haven't really had to confront before in my life. So that was rough as well.
Mm,
Um, yeah, overall, just not a fun time, man. As far as sort of being able to get back to it and get onto it, I think I kind of just got tired of feeling like shit and feeling sorry for myself.
okay.
Kind of got a little bit pissed off and just said, fuck it. Like, why don't I go back and try to make a go at what I'm good at? And, if I did it before, I can do it again. And, that's turned out to be mostly accurate. So,
Yeah, good. I'm glad that that's kind of worked in your favor, and I'm glad that you got over, or that not that you got over, but you've sort of managing, your personal issues as well. I've obviously had a few setbacks in my life, and I've had some mental health issues myself from time to time. So, I guess I'm sort of aware of the challenges around that, and obviously some others, other people that are listening have probably gone through some similar things, particularly around FTX or other, sort of setbacks that, I guess it's important to kind of talk about it and be aware of it, that it's an issue and now that you're back on track. So that's good.
yeah.
So so you you sort of feel like, you're kind of back on track, you've sort of got some confidence back, you're making money again and feel like you're sort of back in your kind of sweet spot. Is that kind of a fair point?
I think mostly I'm playing obviously with a much smaller portfolio now, which does make things a little bit easier, right? Obviously, the nature of trading crypto in general is it's a comparatively small market. Once you venture out of, essentially Bitcoin, maybe Ethereum. So playing with a smaller size in the market does have some advantages in the sense that like it's much easier to get good fills on things just because you're trying to fill less volume. All the way up to, you're not going to be spooking people in the order books as much, with a smaller order as you might with a large one. You won't be targeted, things like that. But those things have kind of worked in my favor. For the most part. It's yeah, I've definitely got a long, long way to go to get back to sort of where I was at previously. But I think I'm making a good start at it, and it's been I've been overly successful as far as like win rate over the past few months go. Um, so I'm aware of that. That I'm at a much higher batting average than I normally would be in my trading. I think that's mostly just due to market conditions. But given where I'm at, I will absolutely take it. So
Yeah, take it. You deserve it. Okay, so you're trading. What are you trading these days? So you're trading crypto primarily, but you're also trading some stocks and futures and that sort of thing?
currently I don't really have any positions in stocks or anything. I do have a small position in crude or no, did I close that? I should probably know these things. Um, no, but I am long like a small position in crude.
Yep.
Other than that, yeah, it's almost entirely crypto. So
Yeah, okay, fair enough. So then just kind of talk to me a little bit about, you sort of talked earlier that a lot of the stuff that you do is trend and sort of momentum based and that sort of thing. But I guess just, it's a new day, the market's open, you're sort of looking around. How do you sort of look for a new trade? Or I guess what's the process around, finding a new idea, something you like, and then putting some money into it? Is there kind of a model that you're running, or is it sort of primarily just discretionary, or sort of how does that sort of work?
yeah, so it's primarily discretionary. I do look at a couple things. Most of the time, I'm kind of just staring at a bunch of numbers, right? Whether that be in chart format, candlestick chart, or whether it just be, like open interest levels, anything like that. And essentially what I'm looking for is something that would spark momentum, something that I can get on the same side of with the market that I will expect to follow through. And that can come in a bunch of different things. So that can come in the form of changes to open interest, right? Where when you compare it against price, like where we can expect, okay, we're going to see sort of a chain reaction kick off here because somebody's, exiting a large position. It could be something coming from, well, a big one over the past, I don't know, year, 2 years has been Michael Saylor T-wapping into things, right? That's a
Yeah.
pretty obvious front run. You're just looking for, a bunch of bids hitting the book essentially on one of a couple of exchanges. Um, but yeah, like generally just looking for something that I think is likely to kickstart momentum in some form or another. And my biggest, at least my like most successful trades sort of do that on a much higher time frame, where I sort of try to combine some fundamental, quote unquote, I use that term very loosely in crypto, analysis, which is mostly just looking for essentially comparative value, right? Where I say like, oh, this thing is like this other thing, right? And I know enough to be able to read the docs and say like I actually do know whether or not the two things are apples and oranges. And then combine that with like, oh, it looks like it's actually getting some momentum, and then I can trade those two things against each other, or in line with the general market, so I don't have to hedge out, dirty hedge, quote unquote, the other side of that pair. So
Yeah, okay.
those are kind of how a lot of my big plays play out, and a lot of them are not so active day to day. Although I do spend most of the day staring at those numbers, most of the time I'm not really actually doing anything about them.
Yeah, okay. And then do you find, like, you've obviously sort of been doing it, I guess 10 years or so now. Do you find that a lot of that process is more intuitive now, that like you've just been doing it for so long that it sort of comes to you intuitively, as opposed to sort of stepping through a process of like, I can see XYZ and it ticks all these boxes and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so there is definitely a lot more intuition, and I think I'm a little bit odd because my head's kind of always worked this way, where it's almost like I'll arrive at a conclusion and then figure out later why I had that conclusion, like discover my own reasoning for it, almost in retrospect. I don't know if that
Yeah,
makes any sense at all.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
a lot of it, like a lot of my trading is kind of the same way, where I'm like, oh, I know I should be long this thing. Now that doesn't mean I'm just going to bid it, but like there's going to be like some kind of like flag go off in my head where I'm like, oh, I should be long, and then I'm going to go like, okay, why do I think that? That's when I start kind of looking through like, okay, what did I notice that actually told me that? And then if all that reasoning that I haven't quite arrived at yet checks out, then I can go ahead and pull the trigger. Um, but yeah, it's definitely become sort of a more intuitive process, but I think that can be a dangerous thing to rely on. So I always try to make sure I'm sort of fact checking myself.
yeah. Okay, cool. And then, obviously there's this sort of big debate in the world around crypto and whether it has any value, what it is, and it's trying to. There's obviously the spot Bitcoin ETFs trying to get approved, and there's a bit of a sort of a push and pull in the market in terms of there's a whole bunch of participants that sort of just view crypto as a waste of time, and then there's a whole bunch of participants that view crypto as the future of money and that sort of thing. I guess like you obviously trade it, but sort of where do you kind of sit in that spectrum in terms of, I guess, what crypto is and its utility in the world and that sort of thing?
Well, so answering that as a trader, I don't fucking care, right?
Yep.
That like it goes up and down. I mean, something pardon my language, and you can cut this if you want to. I think Robot James, who you're probably familiar, says, here's the thing on the chart. It goes up and down, and other cunts trade it. Like that's all you need to know, you know?
Yep.
And so as a trader, that's the mentality, right? As long as it's moving and as long as I've got a counterparty, I'll make money. I trade crypto because it's easily accessible, because I have good access to leverage. Like it's a good place to be as a solo trader, especially with a smaller bankroll. That
Yeah.
aside,
Okay.
I do actually also love the ethos of cryptocurrency. I do think it is primarily scams, right? But I do think, Bitcoin, and I do think some of the smart contract platforms like Ethereum, Solana, et cetera, like their, competitors. Um, I do think there is value to some of it, right? Even if most of what they're used for is to create scams, right? Which again, as a trader, I'll trade the fucking scams.
Yeah.
As like I'm not going to scam anybody myself, but if somebody wants to, trade something that ends up, some developer rug pulls, that's kind of part of the game, right? I've been robbed that way, so it just becomes part of the like risk management framework in a way, I suppose. So it's part of what keeps the
Yeah.
market volatile and keeps it tradable.
Yeah. And then is part of the attraction to you as a trader to crypto is that in a lot of ways the market's well, it's obviously much newer and a bit more probably inefficient. There's a whole, as opposed to sort of traditional markets, that there's just more opportunity for an experienced trader like yourself in crypto.
Um, I think so, but I think the main thing is like you can actually apply a valuation model to something, like you can apply a DCF model to an equity, to a stock, to something like that. Whereas crypto, you're kind of looking at it like, I don't know, who the hell knows what it's supposed to be worth. So the way we figure that out is just some rich guy decides that he thinks it's worth more than what it's trading at right now, and then you get a massive TWAP, and then I can ride that and make money, right?
Yep.
It's the valuation being so sort of vaporous for the vast majority of things. Because even though there are projects and protocols with revenue and cash flow and things like that, none of them are actually valued based on anything remotely resembling a reasonable valuation system, right? It's all because somebody's with a bunch of money is buying or selling coin XYZ in large chunks, right? But
Hmm.
given that I try to ride momentum, that's a perfect market for me, right? Because then there's also no reason for the momentum to stop until some equally rich guy goes up. Okay, it should be going the other way now, right?
Yeah.
So it
Okay.
just makes for a very, very simple market to trade, and it's like much more predictable as well. And I'm not competing on information asymmetry. I'm not competing against guys who are spending billions of dollars to become to get way faster than me at submitting orders. Although there's definitely latency races and things like that. For the most part, it's a much, much, much fairer playing field that is kind of anybody's game. So
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. I never sort of heard it described that way, but it kind of makes sense now that you say it. So you sort of touched on it before around sort of risk management and that sort of thing. So I guess obviously, crypto, there's some specific risks involved that, there aren't as much of in TradFi markets. But how do you kind of think about your portfolio, its construction, and like risk management generally? How are you kind of approaching the market day to day?
Uh, well, there's definitely a bunch of different levels to risk management. So there's all sorts of things. First of all, like the big one, obviously learned through FTX is counterparty, right? Where you're just, if I'm not FDIC insured or, operating with a regulated broker or anything like that, then I have to make sure that I'm, spreading my money around different exchanges, right? So that, any loss or hack or anything like that is going to be, an acceptable portion of my portfolio. Then you have the risk of, wallet compromise, right? If you're storing your private keys in a hot wallet or a cold wallet, you need to also sort of take that same approach where you're splitting up your funds so that if any of these things get compromised, that you're not going to lose more than what you should, right?
Yep.
Uh, like that's another level of it. Then you have like just actual market risk management, right? Which is gonna vary depending on what I'm sort of trying to do. I tend to be very aggressive as far as my actual like market exposure, like risk tolerances.
Okay.
Um, a lot of my success, I think, has been not necessarily caused by, but at least exacerbated by just I'm very, very willing to compound into winners or big plays, right? Like there are plenty of, times where I've been in, 100 plus vol asset and levered up 4, 5, 6x my portfolio value, which is a ridiculous number, right? And it's not
Yep.
like I'm just going in there and swinging away at it like, hey, I'm just gonna, take this all in one chunk. It's like, no, as the market moves in my direction, I continue and I add, and we gradually
Yeah.
get up there. Um, Stop losses, whether, actually a stop loss order or, mechanically triggered based on, say, a swing of momentum to the opposite side of my position. But some sort of like exit criteria that I can step away from the screen and rely on, executing is a big part of what allows me to do that. Um, and again, since I operate on mostly larger time frames, I'm obviously I need to sleep. I need to step away from the computer from time to time. So that's a very big part of what I need.
Yeah.
That
Yeah. Okay.
said,
Yeah.
stop losses as order types are not usually the ideal way to do that, I found. But I'm hesitant to say that just because a lot of the people in crypto who might hear this would be much better off just making sure they place a stop loss order.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's kind of like do as I say, not necessarily as I do, but also I do have, some other systems in place that other people may not have. So
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, and I know there's this sort of big debate in markets around stop loss orders and that sort of thing, but there's I guess pros and cons, but for your general sort of retail investor, it's probably not the worst thing in the world to have a stop loss if it helps you
well,
sleep at
so
night.
the interesting thing about that debate is it's like I understand that like the side that's against stop loss orders is generally like, okay, yes, but they're also going to stop, profits some portion of the time, which is absolutely correct. But I think rather than okay, in more competitive markets, that can be a very large issue, clearly. But when you're talking about markets as inefficient as crypto, just get a bigger fucking edge. Like if it's gonna cut into 5% of your edge, make sure your edge is big enough to be able to afford that because that's sort of an overall umbrella of risk management, right?
Yeah,
Where it's like sure you might be less than optimal, but you're not dead, and not being dead is kind of important. So
yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah, okay, cool. So this question might not be entirely relevant, but I'll ask it anyway because it's always good to sort of get an idea. So where does sort of like, you know, macro affairs and interest rates and monetary policy and all that kind of stuff kind of factor into your thought process at all? Is that sort of something you even think about, or is it just kind of completely irrelevant in terms of the trading that you're doing?
um there's definitely like things from sort of the macroeconomic um world, I suppose, that do have an effect. So crypto is a very, first of all, it's a very cyclical market, right? But it's also a very, very like far out on the risk curve market, right? And so when when things like when we start to see things like interest rate hikes, right, and money and liquidity around the globe becomes tighter in general, crypto is going to be one of the markets that is going to feel that first and hardest, right? Same as sort of like VC, right?
Yep.
Like these are some of the like the further out markets on the risk curve, and so changes to monetary policy around the world are going to have a much more drastic effect. Um, that said, I'm usually much less concerned about reading the news as I am about seeing what the market's doing, because the market's going to read the news and react to it faster than I'm going to be able to read the article.
Hmm.
So I do pay attention to it, and it's kind of one of those after the fact things. It's like, oh, I understand now why this is happening, but it doesn't so much matter to me because I already saw it happening. I don't need to know the why. I just need to know that it's like what's actually going on, right? I can figure out why the thing that's going on is happening later if I care at that point, right?
Yep.
Um, yeah. So
Yeah, cool. Okay. That makes sense. And then so, like there's obviously been sort of talk recently out of the Fed about sort of, I guess, going forward, potentially no more interest rate hikes and, potentially cuts coming in the next 12 months and that sort of thing. So does that mean that your kind of general view for crypto going forward over the next little while is that the market will be favorable, like sort of how it has been in the past 12 months?
yeah, I do. So it's sort of a combination of, yes, we're looking at, um the signs are sort of pointing to a soft landing, right? Which you could argue that we're already in the process of the soft landing and starting to sort of coast to a stop. I don't know
Yep.
how that analogy is supposed to work, but whatever. Um, so I think a combination of that and the fact that, like I said, crypto is a very, very cyclical market that tends to revolve around the Bitcoin halving, right? Which is when the emission rate of Bitcoin is cut in half. That happens every 4 years. And there we tend to get these big market cycles, from trough to peak that just have ridiculous gains, right? And historically, if we're following previous patterns, we are somewhere at, like towards the early middle of that sort of period where we would expect, if the cycle is going to continue, that we would expect to have some decent distance left to go, right?
Yeah, okay.
So combine that with the economic sort of outlook and yeah, just sort of the nature of the market. And I think overall, crypto does look pretty bullish, over the next year or so. Yeah, obviously not financial advice. This is just my opinion, but yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
am I am pretty optimistic. So
yeah, okay. Yeah, fair enough. All right. So look, you've given us sort of like heaps of background and that sort of thing. So maybe just have a bit of fun for a minute and talk about some war stories and that sort of thing.
sure.
Um, so maybe just talk about sort of like maybe some of your best investments that you've made, some of your worst investments, and probably more importantly, I guess, sort of any lessons that you've learned from either of them.
Yeah. So I think probably one of my most important wins was it was writing Shopify from, I believe it was like $22 to 40, right? That was really like the first big win that I had in any market, right? And it was sort of the one that convinced me that I was going to be able to actually eventually make this a living, right? Like it wasn't the
Okay.
first time I'd made money necessarily, but it was the first time where I felt like I thoroughly planned, understood, and executed the trade as well as I could have, right?
Yeah, cool.
Which to me was a big mile marker. I don't remember what the P&L was on the trade, but it wasn't comparatively a lot. But it was sort of that confidence building trade because it was a big one for me at the time, and obviously took quite some time to play out. Um, that was really like sort of the rubber stamp, I suppose, telling me that like, okay, yes, I think this can actually be for me, because you sort of have to round that hump, I suppose, as a new trader where you're like, oh man, am I ever going to be able to figure this shit out? Because starting off, as you know, it's like, sure, you'll book some wins, but generally it's just straight lose, 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 and you're throwing money down the drain. And you really don't know when or whether that's ever going to stop
Yeah.
until, you kind of get to that point. So,
Yeah,
um,
cool.
yeah, I think that was probably one of the biggest trades for me personally.
And gave you some validation that like I'm actually a trader and I know what I'm doing and I'm here to stay, sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, cool.
Oddly enough, I don't really have any super big losses except for, obviously like the FTX thing, right? Which wasn't directly a trade, but
Yeah.
if you think about it, it is still a form of exposure, right? That obviously came back and cost me quite a bit. So I kind of think of it in the same realm.
Hmm.
Um, which was generally a failure on my part, just to, like I said, part of operating in crypto means I cannot trust my counterparties, right? And
Yeah.
I clearly did not, abide by that. So it burned me. Um, but yeah, as far as like losing big positions in the market, I've had a few like liquidations, especially earlier on in my career. Um, I definitely had a big loss that in Bitcoin, I think back in 2019, which was one where I kind of just ignored my own uh like analysis and sort of just went knowing it was stupid. This is way past when I should have made any kind of dumb mistake like this in my career, but just where I'm like, oh, but maybe it will turn around, right? Which is
Yeah.
obviously the exact opposite of what you want to do. You're like, no, I know it's not going to turn around, and I know that even if it does, I'm still wrong to be holding this position. But
Yeah.
something about it was just like, no, I'm just going to hang on. I think that gave me something like a 30% haircut or something like that on the account
Yeah,
at the
right.
time.
Yeah, those are the
Um,
worst when you sort of do something stupid and know that it's stupid at the time, but still go ahead and do
yeah, yeah. So that was one of those.
it.
It Not really much of a lesson, unfortunately, because it's like because I already knew the lesson when I did it, right? You're just kind of
Yeah.
like I being dumb. Like I have no other takeaway from that. Like, hey, me, don't be stupid.
Yeah, fair enough. So then one question that came to my mind is obviously like you trade for a living and have pretty much, sort of always done that as your career. I guess I guess just sort of like as a career choice and something to, you know, obviously you finished school and you had a variety of choices and you just sort of decided to pursue trading and it's worked out for you. I guess like what do you think of trading as a career and how do you like you're interacting with your family and people that you meet and that sort of thing and so well, invariably the question comes up, what do you do for a living and that sort of thing. Like how do you kind of think of trading as a career and like do you enjoy trading as a career? Would you change anything if you had your time over again?
Yeah, so actually, I haven't been a trader for a career for all my adult life. It's at 18 when I first started. I did not have anything resembling a bankroll. Essentially, I was put throwing $100 at a time into the market.
Yeah.
Um, and it wasn't until 2018 actually that I was able to build my bankroll enough to
Okay.
actually move into doing it full time. I spent about 9 years in the Army National Guard, which
Okay.
I loved and hated. I was a helicopter mechanic there, which was quite a cool job actually. I really enjoyed that part. When I was younger, I waited tables. I worked as a car mechanic briefly. Um, and yeah, I've worked with several other companies as well, just on sort of short-term work. I helped a buddy of mine like design a tracking system for like the logistics company he was working at the time. So just like little sort of one-off things. I've done a lot of different things, but it was always with the goal of either building a bankroll or just being able to sustain myself. With the goal of this is a means to an end so that I can trade, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Um, so if you can't tell from that, I do love trading. I do love it.
Yeah.
That said, it's also one of the most frustrating things you can do as a career, right? Because in almost any other career, at least with my style of trading, and again, I sort of oscillated wildly where for a couple of years I was doing a lot of market making and a lot of like very high frequency stuff. And I actually got started market making, trying to do it manually, which I did fairly successfully for a decent amount of time actually.
Okay.
Um, but aside from that sort of stint in my career, most of my trading again is very much just look at numbers, look at data, and don't do anything, right?
Yeah.
That can be incredibly draining if you
Mm.
let it, right?
Mm.
You can't make the market move, you can't make it do things, and it's really hard to hold that discipline to know that you should not be doing something, right? When all you want to do is click some buttons and place a trade.
Yeah.
Most of the time, that's not the correct answer. That's not what you need to be doing. Um, or at least it's not for me, right?
Yeah.
So I always tell people that if they're, people say like, hey, should I start trading or should I learn to trade? Like, absolutely not. Like, if you have to ask me, the answer is no, right? Because
Yeah.
I
Okay.
think the only sort of way you're going to be able to do it and do it well is if it doesn't matter what I tell you, you're just going to do it anyways. Because you kind of have to be that sort of pig-headed and stubborn to get through the, months, years, however long it takes you of losing, and to develop the sort of the stubbornness to maintain your discipline and continue making the choices that you know you need to, even when it's hard, even when it sucks, even when it's boring, even when, emotionally you want to do the exact opposite of what you know you should be doing, all those things, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
And it's kind of one of those things where there's no shortcuts. You've sort of everyone's got to go through the process themselves. And like your process might be longer or shorter than mine, but ultimately everyone's got to go through their own kind of like learning curve to get to the point where they've
yeah.
figured out
Well,
sort
and
of you go.
sorry, I was like the funny thing about trading is like, and I've told people this, and most of them don't quite get it, but it's like I could literally give you like the set of rules that like a set of rules that would lead to successful trading, right? I could tell you like, hey, buy when this number does this, sell when this number does this, right? And I could give you the rules and the layout. And without sort of that practice and discipline, that profitable trading system is going to lose you money because you won't be able to stick to it, right? Unless you've gone through that process of just drilling it into your own skull. It's like, nope, trust the system. Why do I trust the system? Because I have all the numbers. Why do I have all the numbers? Because I spent 3 years losing, winning, and figuring out whether this was going to fucking work to get them, right? Unless you have that, it's just not going to be able to stick. We're not built that way as humans, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you got to bang your head against the wall a few times yourself. So, okay, so saying all of that, um, I guess anyone that's sort of getting into trading, whether it's crypto or TradFi, that sort of thing, and does come to you and say, "Hey, I'm really keen on trading, and I've started playing around, and you've got any advice for me?" What advice would you give for someone sort of starting out and just sort of getting going in the industry?
generally speaking, keep your account as small as possible, right? Click
Okay.
as often as you can. Keep your account as small as possible. Like keep it at an amount where like it still stings a little bit if you lose some money, but that way you're not just burning money unnecessarily. You know, any extra that you would have been able to put it in a savings account or something else instead, and wait until you've sort of reached a level where you understand that you can actually trade well. That said, nobody's gonna fucking listen to that advice, right? Somebody who wants to trade is gonna throw all the money in the account to start off with. They're gonna
Yeah.
lose it, and that's part of like that process of learning and growth, right?
Hmm.
But that would be my advice. The second piece of advice is until you've kind of figured out what your edge is, which is a process that you really I don't think I or anybody else could really walk somebody else through because it's going to be very different, right? The
Yeah.
things I'm good at are not the things you're good at, that are not the things that James is good at, that are not the, we're all good at different stuff, and we all choose trading styles and things that we do in the market that suit our abilities and our situation.
Yep.
Um, but shit, where was I going with that?
Not
Completely
sure.
lost my
Different
train of thought.
trading
Sorry.
styles. I don't know. It sounded like a good idea though. Where you going?
Oh, yeah, like in the process of trying to find your edge, the fastest way to do that, like regardless of what it ends up being for most people, is going to be just clicking more. Like just trade more, get in the market, get out of the market, figure out why, you got slipped on that market order, right? Figure out what happens, when open interest does this. Like if you have any sort of idea, again, while keeping your account small so that these mistakes don't really cost you anything, use it to learn. Like just do as much as you can until you start seeing patterns, until you start seeing something that's like, hey, every time I do this, this happens. Or every time this happens, this other thing also happens, right? Until you kind of have just gone through enough random fucking things that you do in the market to start noticing those patterns, the best thing you can do is go do more random things in the market, right? Because you're going to
Yeah.
start off thinking you know a lot more than you do. And the only way to disillusion yourself of that is to sort of prove to yourself that you don't. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I like the way that you put that though. Like you've got to go through that random process to for it to become non-random. You've sort of just got to the saying, like fuck around and find out. You just got to try things, make mistakes, learn from them, and then eventually it becomes, on some level intuitive that you sort of see some patterns.
yeah. Well, the thing is too, like I think a lot of people start where they're like, "Hey, let me think of a thing that I can do to trade. Like, let me construct a system in my head that that is made of logical rules that is going to give me something that's going to trade profitably, right? Where they start kind of in their head as opposed to starting with the market.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with that approach is you're not the smartest guy in the world. You're not
No.
the first one to think about the market. You're not thinking of anything other people haven't already thought of. If it worked, they're already doing it at more size, faster, better, and like better than you're going to be able to, right? Like if it was a thought worth following to the conclusion.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't, then you're not going to make any money. So your best bet is just, again, getting into the market and then noticing something about the market, right? Because that's where you're
Mm.
going to find things that for whatever reason other people have not either caught on to, that it's not worth their time to do, that maybe just like James likes to say, like for whatever reason, just sucks, right? Which
Yeah.
is a lot of where stuff happens that you can make money from is just doing stuff that other people don't want to or can't for some reason. Um, yeah, it's like, but you're not going to find those things by thinking about them being like, oh, I think the market should behave like this. So let me start there and construct this narrative or this story about how I'm going to make money in the market. That doesn't work, right? You have to
Yeah.
sort of discover for yourself by just observing the random shit that happens. And from that random shit is where you find the little thing that might end up paying your bills for 20 years. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. So is there anything, obviously we kind of talked about various different things and I've kind of guided the conversation, but is there anything that you like sort of wanted to share or particularly wanted to say that we haven't had a chance to cover?
um, honestly, I don't really think so. I will also tell you, I'm fucking exhausted. I was up real late last night and then had to wake up so my internet guy could come in and fix that I was telling you about before the call, which
Hmm.
is also why I do not have video on right now because I'm doing this from my phone. Um, yeah, I think I'm drawing a little bit of a blank there, man.
Yeah, that's fine. No problem. I just wanted to make sure that we sort of hadn't sort of missed anything that was important for you. Well, look, I've really enjoyed the conversation. It's been a great chat just to get a bit of a sense of one, just to talk to you sort of one on one and get a bit of sense of your trading and that sort of thing. So I'd like to thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. Hope it was at least somewhat useful.
Yeah, no,
So,
I think it was great. It's always good to sort of listen back to these. There's always sort of some nuggets of information in there, so I appreciate it. Thanks everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed the show. Once again, please like and subscribe, share all that sort of stuff. Your support for the show helps, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks so much. Cheers. Bye.